1. My roughhousing brothers and I, amateur jewelry thieves, turned to stone, caught right in the spotlight of 5 adult death glares. No one dares to twitch, we stand paralyzed. Cautiously, we let our eyes creep down to the clumsily burglarized pile of diamonds on the floor before us. All that remains of my aunt's most prized blue-tinted vase. The crash still rings in our ears like the alarm bells, or maybe it's the sirens. There on the ground, halfway buried in the blue-tinted diamonds we carried over the edge of the coffee table, 6 or 7 naked roses, dethroned. 2. This is a list of grievances that I composed against God to carve into my heart. When you read it forward, it's 8 lines long. And yes, that I composed a list of grievances is itself an item on said list of grievances. 3. God, I remember my 10th grade chemistry teacher to show us the pervasive power of science. He was such a zealous preacher, dipped a tennis ball in liquid nitrogen and shattered it on his podium, and we applauded like crowds in the bleachers, or maybe it's the pews. But before I can choose, he's explaining the features of liquid nitrogen as he picks up a rose. Time froze as the pervasive power of science held the dethroned rose stiff, still, suspended at the peak of his toss's trajectory. Then beauty shattered down the center aisle of our classroom, and God, a curtain closed inside of me. 4. There's a man on my right offering me a telescope, and a man on my left offering me a microscope. Telescope man says, look through this and you will see the vast expanse of the overarching story. Through this you'll see the consistent glory of every scene from Genesis to Jesus to now, the big picture. Microscope man says, look through here and you will see the intricacy of theology. Through this you can dissect the Greek and read some scholarly books and figure out all the answers. My head is a chaotic courtroom full of speculations and competing explanations, full of microscopes and telescopes, and God, I don't get why I need anything just to see you. 5. I remember when that Category 5 monster took a bite out of the bottom half of this country. I was wading through little kids and emergency supplies, scattered in the parlor of our church-turned-refugee camp, following the crowd toward the sound of crying, toward the news. Wait, I think that's, a man next to me began, peering at the projector screen as a neighborhood sank into the water. Daddy, is that our street? He picked up the little girl, I guess his daughter, and stroked her hair. No, not anymore. His eyes were empty and his face was pale. And outside, the sky pummeled the puddles, and from the windows where we cried, God, the raindrops looked like needles. 6. Outside where she is, the city blocks sleep soundly. Inside, he sits silently, staring at a ceiling, constantly feeling there's an empty hole in his chest, pumping emptiness into his veins. The incomplete strains of their broken romance echo like the sound of her voice, haunting, harmonized by her heart's horrible thievery, taunting. In his teary mind's eye, he watches her stroll off with that other guy again and again as broken wings sag, murder and suicide playing tag in his inanimate fantasies. He hangs his head hopelessly, and God, every night is the same. 7. The tired young housewife in front of me at the checkout didn't have enough money for the makeup she needed to cover her bruises. She could have been beautiful. And God, my hands were useless hammers at my sides. 8. I complained to my friend the whole way on the road to Emmaus. Sandals shuffling in the dirt, I guess I really thought he was the Messiah. My friend and this stranger walking along beside us listened as I enumerated my grievances. All the pain without measure left in the world, and he lets himself get killed. I thought he said he'd fulfilled these prophecies and said he'd instilled this spirit, but instead he just got killed, leaving us in a world filled with hurt, with pain without measure he didn't defeat. And if he didn't even do that, what did he come for in the first place? I hadn't noticed, but I'd slowed my pace. My eyes were blurred. 3 days ago, I would have sworn I heard him say his kingdom was eternal. But if the kingdom is going on right now, God, why does it still hurt so much? Why all this pain without measure? Measure it with Calvary. The suggestion came from the stranger walking next to me. He was offering me bread. Measure it with Calvary. His hands were pierced. The world was spinning. Measure it with Calvary. I was at that point in the air when you're not flying up and you haven't started falling yet, there at the top, weightless, speechless. He began speaking again, and I started to drop. 8. That night, I wasn't even in Jerusalem. I had to go much further to secure your pardon. My feet were fountains of sand as I followed a pillar of fire across the desert, searching out the long misplaced garden. When I arrived, I paid the entry fee, taking an angel's flaming sword to the side. Don't tell me you didn't see blood and water pouring out. I found the tree on both sides of the river, ate as much as I could, cut it down and took some wood and gave it to this guy Simon, because I was tired. And the seed of that fruit was inside of me, and you know what they say about a seed. Unless it falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, well, that's a different story. 7. For your information, that bruised, abused housewife in the checkout line was already beautiful, because not far behind those bruises, an unbroken princess's spirit still soars. And whenever he's gone, she opens the windows and does her chores in lipstick and high heels. And the day she comes knocking on my doors, we'll have a 1940s ticker tape parade, and how her face will finally shine. 6. Someday in life's dance, that lonely boy will find himself partnered with a blue-eyed girl. Oh, how they'll twirl and spin and dip. She'll look at the floor and bite her lip to keep from smiling. And when he walks her home, the tiny raindrops are shimmering like an infinity of silver chandeliers crashing silently to the ground all around them. Her moonlit face looks to his, and he'll think of that other girl with that other guy, and he'll spoil the moment by laughing so much at himself. 5. See, there's something about a hurricane that can always awaken the courage that everyday life has taken and told you that you don't need. And in the face of disaster and tragedy, just imagine all the sleepwalkers shaken and forced to rub their eyes and behold a hurting world for the first time, and then tell me that's not worth smashing cities for. 4. The physician takes my hands in his, and I drop the microscopes and telescopes with a clatter. He places in his ears the two ends of a stethoscope, raises that searing metal circle to my sternum, closes his eyes and says, "Breathe with me." He pats me on the shoulder and hands me a lollipop. "Your heart's not ready for microscopes or telescopes yet, kid," he says, and I'm okay with that. 3. As I stared at the floor in my 10th grade chemistry classroom, I could do no more than think, but not quite understand. What better cathedral for beauty and science to walk hand in hand across thawing rose petals and vow till human stupidity do us part. 2. When I went to carve my list of grievances into my heart, I found a love letter already written there. I had to read it in the mirror, and backwards it was still 8 lines long. And yes, that I got a love letter is itself an item in said love letter. 1. When I teetered too close to the edge and tumbled off, my life erupted in blue-tinted shards that exploded outward and upward in total disregard for the naked, dethroned roses of my life. And as the glass hung in the air, having run out of momentum but not quite ready to fall, I had to admire the way the light glinted off the blue-tinted pieces, finally freed from their forced conformity to reflect at any newfound angle they chose to direct their frozen constellations. And when it all finally came crashing to the ground, God, it looked like so many diamonds.